Right now, Neptun's ATACMS and Bars have broken through Russia's defenses so deeply that the generals are left speechless. An apocalypse in the Russian Federation. The Ukrainian armed forces have devastated half of Russia. Meanwhile, China is taking back what's theirs. A harsh attack on Moscow. The Kremlin did not expect this from Xi Jinping. On the diplomatic front, it's an adrenaline-fueled thriller. Trump is changing the peace plan on the fly. And ahead is a personal meeting with Zelenskyy that could turn the game upside down. Donbas, Crimea, NATO, everything is at stake. Ukraine has prepared a powerful response that will turn the situation around. Stay tuned, drone hell for the Russian Federation. Strategic sites are in ruins, panic at the borders. Russia is experiencing its most terrifying night of drone apocalypse, while the Ukrainian armed forces hold the front, press the enemy, and counterattack. Our forces have achieved the incredible. Kadyrov Jr. is 18. The heir of the Chechen clan bursts into adulthood. What is the criminal dynasty plotting now, and what are the youngest plans for the future? These are the kind of details you definitely won't want to miss. And an astonishing story of a Russian army soldier's escape from Putin's meat grinder. It's just brutal over there. All this and more coming up in our episode of Hotspot. Ukraine's defense forces have launched total retribution for the strikes on our territory. Burning aircraft factories, exploding terminals, unique assets destroyed. Planes, detonations, Taganrogs, chaos, Novorossiysk, darkness in occupied Donetsk. Neptun's Flamingo ATACMS and Bars went in so deep that Russian generals were left speechless. And Russian air defense kept consistently firing at their own. Watch the fiery details right now.
Key Russian military and energy facilities are under attack. In just one strike, the Russians lost an aircraft repair plant, a drone manufacturing facility, an oil terminal, a refinery, an S-400 air defense system, and the cherry on top, an experimental A-60 laser aircraft, which Russia will no longer be able to recreate.
This is actually, likewise.
The residents of Taganrog witnessed the blaze. It was a very hot night there on Monday going into Tuesday, especially in the area around the Beriev aircraft repair plant. The facility specializes in the development, serial production, modernization, and repair of amphibious aircraft and special-purpose aviation complexes, particularly the A-50 long-range airborne early warning and control aircraft. The aircraft plant also carries out major overhauls of Russian aviation aircraft and upgrades strategic Tu-95 MSM bomber missile carriers. Next to the facility is the main test base of the plant, the Taganrog Yuzhny military airfield. Rare examples of Russian aviation equipment are stored at this location.
Yes, an airplane.
More precisely, rare examples of Russian aviation equipment used to be stored here. At the air base, an A-60 aircraft, also known as the Flying Laboratory, was hit. This aircraft was intended for testing laser weapons. It is a Soviet development. The project was developed in the 1970s. As part of the USSR's strategy to create anti-satellite laser weapons, the aircraft is distinguished by a distinctive hump. It is in this hump that a 1-megawatt laser installation is located. The idea was that this laser could either jam the optical devices of enemy satellites or even damage their sensors and other equipment. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, the project was frozen, but the Russians brought it back from the dead and spent years trying to breathe new life into it. At the same time, they never missed a chance to threaten the world with their so-called unparalleled weapons.
The Russian army will soon be equipped with a Star Wars-style weapon capable of burning the enemy both on the ground and in the air.
The Soviets developed only 2 such aircraft, so the destruction of one is not just a painful blow to Putin's ambitions, but a devastating one. The Russians will no longer be able to recreate their flying laboratory. And the Z Patriots know this as well.
They've never heard of protective shelters before deployment. It will soon be 4 years since the start of the special military operation. The idiotic internet shutdowns didn't help either against enemy UAVs, which are controlled in part by satellite communication systems, or against local residents filming footage of the strikes. Probably an effective measure would have been to redeploy the aircraft from a region that is under enemy UAV attacks almost every day.
But the fact that these were drone strikes is far from certain. The Ukrainian General Staff stated that they used Bars drones and Neptun cruise missiles to strike Russian strategic targets. Whoa,
It's coming in right now. I can see it approaching. It just hit the building. That was a hell of an incredible hit, really, damn.
during the strike on Taganrog, the Molnia UAV manufacturing facility by Land Air was also hit. Fires have been reported at the site, according to the military. But it wasn't just Taganrog. Explosions were also heard en masse in the Krasnodar region. The strikes targeted the Sheskari's oil terminal in Novorossiysk and the Tuapse oil refinery. In Novorossiysk, oil storage tanks and one of the S-400 air defense system launchers were damaged, according to the general staff. The extent of the damage is being clarified.
Beijing is cunningly humiliating Russia, showing Russians their place. And here's a real-life example. Due to sanctions-related import restrictions, Chinese suppliers are hiking up prices for Russian buyers of military goods, squeezing the most out of the Kremlin's dependence. And this is just the beginning. More in our report.
China is betraying Russia. Yes, you heard that right. Beijing skillfully pretends to be a partner, but in reality it uses Moscow as the weak link.
And in our language, there's a phrase that has become a catchphrase. Russians and Chinese are brothers forever.
But here's what's interesting. Recently, Xi spoke on the phone with Trump and stated that he supports the US's peaceful efforts to resolve the Russia-Ukraine conflict. It sounds nice in words. But what about in practice?
I think that China has sent a political signal to the United States, indicating that it is closely watching what is happening regarding the track of peaceful settlement and the search for peaceful solutions in the Russia-Ukraine war. The main point of this signal should be the following. Russia absolutely must not win this war, and Ukraine, accordingly, must not lose. This is an important and fundamental principle.
But here's something else. The leaders of the countries have agreed on visits, and Trump is planning to go to China as early as April.
Whether Trump will be able to reach the desired trade agreement with China, specifically in April, for example, during a potential meeting in Beijing, is a big question. Nothing deeper than that, in my opinion, especially regarding the end of the Russia-Ukraine war. Within these timeframes, April 2026, there is no meeting between Xi Jinping and Trump in Beijing.
But what is China doing wrong in relation to Russia? It seems like everything is fine.
But the thing is, China is making very good money off Russia. The prices of export goods supplied to Russia have increased by an average of 87%.
Relations between Russia and China have always been very complicated. And if we think they are friends, no, there's actually a good word for this, they are fellow travelers. Russia and China are fellow travelers. It benefits China to have a weak Russia, it benefits China to have a weak Putin, it benefits China to buy raw materials cheaply, and it benefits China to then sell goods to the Russian Federation at very high prices. Russia, for the most part, has no other way out anymore.
And it's not just about goods. China is gradually entering Russian regions, thereby gaining access to territories and resources.
There are already examples in the Far East where small settlements have become predominantly Chinese, and now they even participate in municipal elections there.
Russia, in turn, is becoming increasingly dependent on China.
And does Putin like this kind of relationship? Again, of course not, of course he doesn't like it. Well, because Putin has phantom pains about the Soviet Union. Basically, throughout his presidency, he has tried to restore some kind of former greatness. He even calls himself the gatherer of Russian lands. But in reality, he is simply leading the Russian Federation to ruin. To complete, absolute ruin, to financial bankruptcy.
Beijing is increasingly strengthening its influence in Central Asia while pushing Moscow into the background, which likely cannot help but worry the old man in the Kremlin. It is necessary
to steadfastly strengthen the friendship between China and Kazakhstan, to make joint efforts to promote comprehensive cooperation, and to do more to contribute to peace in the region and the world, as well as to the development of stability and positive energy in Chinese-Kazakh relations.
Here is the main question. What exactly drives China? Is it a true partnership with Russia?
Our close communication reflects the strategic nature of Russian-Chinese relations, which are at an unprecedentedly high level.
Or is Beijing simply taking advantage of the situation and acting in its own interests?
They are not interested in the Russian Federation winning this war. Because if Putin wins this war, he restores his geopolitical agency. he starts talking to all the players, for example, to the United States and China, on an equal footing, which is absolutely strategically not in China's interests. Yes, this position is covert.
China talks about friendship, but only acts when it benefits them. China profits from Russia, strengthens its influence, and at the same time builds relations with the US. Meanwhile, Moscow is becoming increasingly dependent on Beijing's decisions.
A new turn in the military diplomatic thriller. Shock, Trump is rewriting the rules again. New points of the plan have surfaced. Diplomatic tensions, Donbas is heating up, Crimea, NATO, everything is at stake. The US, Ukraine, the EU, or Russia, who will win the battle for the final version? And are Trump and Zelenskyy really preparing a decisive blow against the Kremlin? And this is just the warm-up. In the near future, Zelenskyy will meet with Trump in person to secure the necessary terms for Ukraine. Will Ukraine be able to turn the situation in its favor? The latest information about the peace negotiations is coming up next in the report.
No restrictions for the armed forces of Ukraine, no ban on joining NATO, and much more. The so-called Trump plan in its original form no longer exists. According to the Financial Times, it has been cut by almost a third. However, the details have not yet been disclosed.
As of now, after Geneva, there are fewer points, no longer 28, and many important things have been taken into account in this framework. There is still work to be done even now. The following is a list of sources that were referenced during the making of this video. These sources were carefully chosen to provide accurate information and support the content presented here.
Informed about the course of the negotiations, report that all parties have agreed to continue discussing only issues related to bilateral relations between Ukraine and the United States. Separate topics should be considered in other formats. After all, in its original version, the document contained nuances that did not depend on Ukraine at all. Now, by presenting a united front, Europe and Ukraine have decided to discuss their respective issues with the United States while taking each other's interests into account.
This partnership not only allows us to act together, but it also shows that shared interests actually create a strong foundation for joint action.
At the same time, to prevent any leaks. After the meeting, no copies of the new peace agreement were handed out, reported the first Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Serhiy Kyslytsya. All copies of the document, agreed upon in Geneva, were collected from everyone except the heads of the delegations. Nevertheless, some details still leaked to the press as rumors. For example, there was a clear refusal to reduce the number of Ukrainian armed forces at Moscow's insistence.
Our European partners made it very clear that Ukraine's sovereignty cannot be discussed at all, and any restrictions on the army or on Ukraine's ability to join any alliance also have no right to be discussed. And from this point of view, it is obvious that demands, for example, to amend Ukraine's constitution to prohibit joining NATO will be dropped. And it seems to me that these are the main important points.
Another crucial point for Ukraine was the discussion of security guarantees. According to analysts, the representatives from Washington managed to convey that such commitments from the Russian Federation mean absolutely nothing. Therefore, the only real guarantees can be agreements with the US and Europe, as well as the unhindered development of the defense industry within Ukraine itself. And here, for the first time, it was stated that these are guarantees not only for Ukraine, but for the entire continent.
Importantly, in Europe, they are currently talking about guaranteeing peace through strength. That is, European countries are now officially and openly saying that we must be ready to fight against Russia, including on Ukrainian territory, if after signing a peace agreement, Russia fails to comply with the agreed upon terms. And this moment, it seems to me, actually represents a kind of significant tectonic shift, because things like this were never discussed before.
At the same time, the White House believes that the negotiations to end the war in Ukraine were productive. However, there are still a few disagreements, said White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre following the meeting. She also said in an interview with Fox News that arms supplies to Ukraine have their limits and cannot go on indefinitely, subtly hinting at what might happen to US aid if Kyiv pushes its position too aggressively. However, even when it comes to weapons, things are far from straightforward.
It is Europe that is buying American weapons for Ukraine. They are actually buying them. And from this perspective, Trump's threats not to supply weapons to Ukraine would, in fact, be a violation of agreements not only with Ukraine, but also with Europe.
Losing multi-billion-dollar contracts and paying penalties for breaking them is clearly not what Donald Trump is counting on. Meanwhile, the American delegation is already in Abu Dhabi, where several days of meetings will be held with the Russian side. A peace plan, agreed upon on Sunday between the US and Ukraine, will be presented to the Russian Federation. According to experts, given that Moscow previously stated that they hadn't seen anything and needed to look into the matter, this time the Kremlin also doesn't seem particularly inclined toward constructive dialogue.
But this gives the Russian Federation the opportunity to build a system in which they won't even, so to speak, engage with or consider this plan. In doing so, they are trying to keep the initiative on their side and avoid getting drawn into this negotiation process, because getting involved would essentially mean playing by someone else's rules, by the rules of Kyiv, Europe, and Washington. Once again, Moscow does not want to be in a position where it is being led, and when it is perceived primarily by the United States as the key barrier to achieving peace.
However, as analysts say, no one really expects that Putin will agree to terms acceptable to Europe without pressure. And this pressure should primarily come from Washington, which means the main task is to convince the United States that the peace plan should be exactly this way.
Judging by the fact that the negotiations didn't drag on for too long and ended with a friendly dinner, these are clear signals and signs that everything went more than well. And we know he has quite a difficult character. Steve Witkoff, a man who is both extremely wealthy and extremely capricious in equal measure, would never have agreed even for the sake of politeness. He simply wouldn't have agreed. He wouldn't have stayed for dinner and spent his time if he felt that the results of the negotiations didn't satisfy him.
Meanwhile, to ensure that Trump himself doesn't deviate from the course of peaceful settlement agreed upon at the meeting, the closest friends of the American leader in European politics have flown to Washington. Finnish President Alexander Stubb and Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni, who have already demonstrated more than once that they know how to find common ground with Donald Trump.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Russia was once again engulfed by a night raid of unknown drones which broke through the defenses and destroyed Putin's strategic military targets. At the same time, 4 Russian drones entered the airspace of Moldova and Romania. Zelenskyy spoke about the consequences of Russia's attack on Ukraine and called for increased pressure on Russia. At this time, the situation on the front is extremely tense, but the Ukrainian armed forces are holding the line, not allowing the occupiers to break through the defenses in the Kupiansk direction. In the Zaporizhzhia direction as well. The Ukrainian armed forces are also putting pressure on the enemy and defending all positions. Whenever possible, Ukrainian defenders launch counteroffensives. Details in our military review.
One of the longest and most massive attacks since the start of the full-scale war. That's how the head of Krasnodar Krai, Veniamin Kondratyev, described the nighttime attack on his region. Drones also visited the Russian city of Taganrog in the Rostov region. An aircraft manufacturing plant was attacked there. The Ukrainian General Staff confirmed the destruction of a Russian experimental A-60 aircraft as well as a drone manufacturing facility.
This aircraft is equipped with laser technology, and it is the only one of its kind in the Russian aerospace forces. That makes this unprecedented. In terms of the success of the Ukrainian Defense Forces' strike on legitimate military targets within the territory of the occupying country.
In addition, in Novorossiysk, Russia, there was a strike on an oil terminal. Stands and a launcher from an S-400 air defense missile system warehouse were hit. The Tuapse oil refinery was also struck.
Let me remind you of the technical specifications of the Bars. It has a range of about 700 kilometers. The warhead weighs between 50 and 100 kilograms, with a target engagement range accordingly. The Neptun's length and its target engagement range is about 1,000 kilometers. Therefore, striking legitimate military targets on the territory of the Russian Federation is yet another proof of the successful work of the Ukrainian defense industry.
It is also unsafe in the Russian digital space. Ukrainian hackers breached the alert system in Krasnodar Krai, which resulted in the activation of chemical and radiation alarms there. Instead of defending their own regions, the Russian army fired at Ukrainians. A video appeared online showing at least 8 caliber missiles being launched from Novorossiysk towards Ukraine. At the same time, the Russians attacked residential buildings where peaceful people were sleeping. The president of Ukraine stated that the enemy struck several regions of our country, but the epicenter was Kyiv. According to him, the occupiers sent more than 460 drones into Ukraine, 4 of which entered Moldova and Romania. It is necessary
to interpret this kind of attack not only as targeting Ukrainian territory, but also accordingly as targeting the territory of Moldova and Romania, as a tactic by the Russian Federation to raise the stakes during the time of crucial international meetings.
The situation along the line of contact remains tense. The occupying army is trying to break through in Pokrovsk.
Ukrainian defense forces managed to carry out a sweep almost in the city center. We are talking about the successful actions of Ukrainian assault units in the area of the Pokrovsk Pedagogical College Soborna Square and the railway station. In addition, Ukrainian defense forces have expanded their presence both in Pokrovsk itself and, accordingly, have carried out a number of successful counterattacks.
The defenders on the Kupiansk direction are not allowing the occupiers to break through the Ukrainian defenses. Here, the Russians are trying to break through with small assault groups, but they are immediately stopped by the Ukrainian armed forces. Our defenders are employing active defense tactics in the Zaporizhzhia direction and seize every opportunity to launch counterattacks.
Adam Kadyrov is 18. Now this unhinged heir to a criminal clan is officially of age. Watch right now to learn about his creative journey, bizarre antics, and intriguing plans for the future. In
Chechnya, it's a celebration. Adam Kadyrov has turned 18. His coming of age is marked not just by congratulations, but by an entire set of symbols, as if this date carries political significance. Ramzan Kadyrov offered his son words of support, once again emphasizing that Adam Kadyrov is an important figure in both the family and the public sphere. Now the younger Kadyrov is officially an adult, but it feels like in the public sphere he has long been portrayed differently, bigger, louder, and more significant than his actual age. Since
November 2023, he worked as the head of the department ensuring his father's security service, and in April 2025, he became the head of the Regional Security Council. Considering that his father was also a security officer for the previous president, there is a strong possibility that Ramzan is grooming a successor for himself.
Every appearance in official footage, every congratulation, every joint public event seems to weave him into the script for the future. And the father's congratulation is not just a family tradition, but a gesture that once again sparks discussions about what role Kadyrov's son might take on in the future.
Radom was promoted to curator of the Chechen Ministry of Internal Affairs and then to secretary of the Republic's Security Council, for which he is also unqualified due to his age, not even objectively, but simply by the formal criteria that are set there. In other words, a teenager who became known for beating a helpless detainee has made a meteoric career and received the highest honors.
The list of awards and titles Adam received by the age of 18 is striking not for the scale of his achievements, which are little known, but for the speed at which he accumulated them. It's almost a phenomenon in itself, such a young age, yet such a list of official distinctions. However, the question of his merits to the country remains open.
Adam is not known as a romantic young man at all, but rather as someone who has already used violence in practice. As you may recall, 2 years ago, at the age of 15, Adam personally beat up a detainee in a pre-trial detention center, the well-known blogger from Grozny, Nikita Zhurevel. Any other teenager would have ended up in a juvenile detention facility for something like that. But in the case of Kadyrov Jr., the opposite happened. He was rewarded.
Every time Ramzan Kadyrov publicly acknowledges his son, the topic of succession resurfaces. It's not that there are absolutely no official statements, but the hints, the nuances, and the very way the footage is presented create the impression that a political succession is being shaped. Considering the presence of other members of the Kadyrov clan in power, everything becomes perfectly clear.
As the publication Prokt has established, he has 96 relatives who are not just present, but have been placed in important and lucrative positions.
Adam is not just a family member, but part of a structure that has been formed over a long time and in a very deliberate way. Adam's recent wedding also turned out to be a public event of significant scale. For some, it's a sign of coming of age and adherence to tradition. For others, it's just another detail in the carefully crafted image. However, the scale of that wedding raised quite a few questions.
Expensive watches and cars for the offspring of the Chechen little Tsar who despises the law, is that really what they think is worth dying for? In addition to violating the sanctions regime, there's also clear disregard for Russian laws. Adam Kadyrov is not yet of legal age. He will only turn 18 on November 24th. Nevertheless, he was boldly driving a car, even though Russian law prohibits obtaining a driver's license before the age of 18.
And so Adam Kadyrov is approaching adulthood in a position that can hardly be called the result of his own personal journey. He is surrounded by awards, titles, and public gestures that say much more about the system than about him personally.
It is actually possible to break away from the Russian army and find safety far from Putin's empire of terror. Vladimir's example proves this. He is already far from the front, from bullets and persecution. Here are stories of a daring escape and advice for those Russians who want to break free from the meat grinder of war and breathe freely.
Vladimir Bernhard is an ordinary Russian guy from the town of Abinsk in the Krasnodar region. In September 2022, he was mobilized into the Russian army. He is a patriot and a decent citizen. He was loyal to the Kremlin's policies and supported the so-called special military operation. But after finding himself in the hell of war, he radically changed his point of view.
There is no justice, and it turns out that our state, represented by our leaders, does not create this justice. They don't want to pursue it, and they don't want to instill it.
Vladimir served for more than 2 years in a medical evacuation company. He saved soldiers and provided them with first aid. 3 months after he began his service, his views became anti-war. In 2023, the man started a blog on Telegram and a YouTube channel called Cossack's Diary, where he reported directly from the front lines about the meat grinder assaults and the officers' attitude toward ordinary soldiers. For this, Vladimir was thrown into a pit, beaten, and even threatened with being zeroed out, but the truth teller did not give up.
In December 2024, I didn't return to the front after my leave and went on the run. I lived in the forest, tried to catch fish and game, and gathered berries and mushrooms. In August 2025, I tried to cross the border between Russia and Georgia illegally, through the mountains, having gotten there by motorcycle. Legally, I couldn't. Firstly, I was put on the federal wanted list due to a criminal case for leaving my unit without permission. Secondly, I did not have a valid Russian or international passport.
Vladimir was unable to cross the border into Georgia after 10 months of wandering and an unsuccessful attempt to leave the Russian Federation, Vandernos, to his private home in Abinsk, where he began to prepare a new plan to escape the country. I was considering the option of fleeing to Finland, Azerbaijan, and Armenia. I even thought about living in a shack in Siberia. But after some time, the neighbors handed Vladimir over to the security forces. The man was detained several hundred meters from the house.
They put handcuffs on me, forced me face down to the ground, and started beating me. They hit me with the butt of a rifle and kicked me with their boots. Fortunately, I used to practice universal combat and know how to turn away to soften the blows. My teeth and ribs remained intact. One of the officers who was beating me asked if I had any knives and where my documents and money were. He asked about the money 2 or 3 times. I pointed out where everything was. Later, it turned out that I was missing more than 80,000 rubles. Almost all my funds, which I had planned to use to escape.
Vladimir was held in the building of the military commandant's office, in a cell with 4 other detainees. They had to sleep on the floor, food was brought to them, and they were taken to the toilet under guard. After 3 weeks of hellish conditions, the man was taken for interrogation by FSB officers. They told him that a criminal case was being prepared against him for spreading fake news, for posts about what was really happening on the front line. The prospect, 2 criminal cases, a lenient sentence, and then being sent back to the front line. Vladimir once again began to think about an escape plan. This time, he, along with several dozen other escapees like him, was sent to a military unit in the Krasnodar region, where they were kept under guard by the military. During this time, Vladimir established a reputation as a runaway who had come to his senses. He was issued a new Russian Federation passport.
I woke up at 4 a.m., went to the bathroom and saw that the entire shift of guards was asleep. I walked past them, jumped over the fence, made my way through the bushes, got into the city and called a taxi. And I went to the place where my motorcycle and the things that had been prepared for me in advance were waiting. Then I took off on my motorcycle toward the border with Belarus.
The man had to evade the traffic police several times, crashed his motorcycle, and had to throw away part of his gear. After that, he continued on by hitchhiking, using BlaBlaCar, and taking taxis. After 2 weeks on the run, he made it to Smolensk, from where he set out on foot toward the border with Belarus.
I'm walking along the Wild Boar Trail. But this just doesn't quite feel right to me, not at all, not like it does over there, in that other place. It said very clearly, 560 meters to the Gribovka field, which is just up ahead. I keep thinking about it, and honestly, something about this situation just feels off. It doesn't sit well with me, not the way it should.
He managed to cross the border without encountering any border guards. In Belarus, Vladimir exchanged money, got a room, and cleaned himself up. After that, he bought a ticket and flew to another country. Now, after everything he's been through, Vladimir understands that a new, difficult life in exile awaits him. And that is something he will never forgive the Kremlin for.
Most likely, I will never return to my homeland, even though I always wanted to live only in Russia. At the very least, I will dedicate part of my life to fighting the Putin regime, within the means available to me. I will never forgive him for destroying hundreds of thousands of lives, and for forcing me to part with my loved ones and my native country. In almost a year of my desertion, counting from last December when I didn't return to the war after my leave, I have never once doubted my decision. Under no circumstances am I willing to return to the front anymore. During the war, I became a pacifist, and I am not willing to betray my values and principles.
That's all. For more breaking news from the front, tune in to our next episode.